Hello everyone, welcome to our English conversation program. I'm very delighted to be presenting another guest hour together with
Beth Higgins. Hi everybody, it's nice to be back. The guest this month is one of your familiar favorite voices, Faith Bach, who's a freelance actor, kabuki commentator, and who will soon be a graduate student at Oxford. Let's see what she has to say.
Today's guest hour is very special for two reasons. One, the guest used to be one of the regular performers for this program. Two, she's leaving Japan for good soon, and we are very lucky to have been able to arrange this interview prior to her departure. Well, Faith, it's a bit of a funny feeling for me to say something like, welcome to the 英語会話 program, because you were part of it. But anyway, nice to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everybody.
Okay, let me begin by asking about yourself by way of introduction. And could I ask where you were born and brought up?
Yes, in Boston, Massachusetts, USA.
And do you think you speak English with Boston accent?
No, I don't think so, no. It's more of a general accent, but it's probably an East Coast accent anyway. Could you tell us a little more about Boston itself? Well, everybody's familiar, I'm sure, with the Boston Marathon. That seems to be all that the Japanese are familiar with about Boston, but it is, in fact, the oldest place in America, which isn't very old, but that's where the revolution began a couple hundred years ago. It's a port town. It's very tiny and very cute. It looks like a very, very tiny little London, a very sort of old-fashioned European kind of place. It's very nice. I think students might be especially interested in Boston because of the many famous universities there. Ah, yes. There's MIT, the Mass Institute of Technology, which has many Japanese students, and also Harvard, of course, is a very famous place. Harvard is the oldest school in the country.
Well, and when did you come to Japan first time, and can you tell us how?
Yes. In 1973, I came over on a junior year abroad program. Sophia University International Division was running a program which I believe they still run called Year in Japan. And I had had 2 years of college in the States. I was a theater major, and I was getting a little bit bored with it, and I'd always wanted to come to Japan ever since I was young, and I just thought, well, I think I'll go. So I saved some money and came over here and did a year at Sophia, and then I was able to do one more year at Sophia and got a bachelor's degree from Sophia in Far East Asian Studies, and that was the beginning of my Japanese career, my career in Japanese studies.
Well, I'm still curious, why did you choose to come to Japan?
Everybody asks
other
me
countries,
that.
yes.
It was my karma, I think. I don't know why, because in those days, as you probably know, on the East Coast in America, there wasn't a lot of interest in Oriental culture. It's different now. There are a lot of Japanese restaurants and stuff in Boston, but in those days, there was very little influence. And I just had always been fascinated with the Orient and with Oriental culture. I had seen Bunraku on television when I was about 10 years old, and I was fascinated. And I'd always wanted to leave America and go to someplace completely different. So I saw my chance, and I escaped. And I came here.
And when you came to Japan, did you find Japan completely different
from America?
From America?
I think so. I think more or less completely different, yes. Yes. After you finished your study at Sophia, then did you stay in Japan or? Yes, I did stay. I had originally come for a year, but I liked it so much that I decided to stay because with one more year I could get a BA from them. And I stuck around and I worked. I taught English, and I did some work at Sophia Graduate School. I did some work in Buddhism and also in the Manyoshu. That's where I was first exposed to the Manyoshu.
Then after that, I understand you returned to the United States and did your graduate work somewhere.
At
Would
the
you mind
University
telling us
of
about
Minnesota,
that?
yes. It was time to go get a master's degree, so I went to the University of Minnesota, And they didn't have any specialists in Buddhism, which is what I've been studying, Oriental philosophies. But the head of the graduate school, Dr. Copeland, is a wonderful man, and he happened to be a Manyoshu specialist. And since I had had a couple of classes in Manyoshu at Sophia, and I liked it, and I just wanted a master's in classical Japanese, I thought, well, I might as well do Manyoshu. And he got me very interested in Manyoshu, and so I did. I took my master's degree at the University of Minnesota and also taught first-year Japanese to undergraduates there. And then came back here 3-4 years ago on a Mombusho
On a Mombusho program. So you studied in Japan, the United States, and now you will be studying in Britain this time. And can you tell us why England this time?
Oh, well, it's time for a change. I've been to America and to Japan, and I think they're both rather extreme places. I see Europe as being somewhere in between those two places. And also I've been away from my own culture for a long time. And I've always wanted to go to England on sort of a roots mission to see the roots of classical Western culture and particularly theater, because I started in theater, and I've been working in Kabuki the past few years, and have my interest in classical Western theater has sort of redeveloped, and I don't think I could be any place after having worked in Kabuki where there was no good theater. So I really have to get to some good theater, and so it has to be England. America's theater isn't good enough for me.
I think you're going to the right country for that reason.
Yes, I do too.
Well, it's clear that you're very, very interested in drama. May I ask how you developed your interest in it?
Yes, I'd like to know that.
Yes, well, that was sort of a natural development. My mother was a radio actor back in the days before television, and she was also one of the people who activated for the Actors Union a long, long time ago. And I was never particularly interested in theater until I was about 11 years old. And my mother was teaching drama. She had a private drama school. She was teaching like junior high kids. And they were putting on a show for the end of the year recital, and it had 2 male parts, but there was only 1 boy in the class. And none of the other little girls could play the boys' parts because they all looked too much like girls. But I was 11 and I still looked like a little boy.
So you volunteered?
I was very skinny. I did not volunteer. I was drafted. My mother, sort of looked at me very closely for several days, and I said, "What are you looking at me for?" She said, "Well, I think you could play that part." It was the part of a little Indian servant, and I wore a turban and brown makeup, and I was very, very skinny and like a little pencil. And of course I was very, very hurt that I was the only little girl in my neighborhood who could play a boy. But my mother told me it's a very good experience to start your career in a character part. And she was right. And of course I did it once, and I was bitten by the bug, as they say. And after that I went on with it.
So you continued acting in different things from that time?
Yes, from the time I was about 12, I guess. I did community theater and theater in school, and then I majored in theater when I was in college. But I didn't really want to go into theater professionally because it's not a very nice life. Particularly in America, you can't really make your living as a stage actor. You have to do TV and stuff like that, and I'm not really interested in that. So I decided to do something different, but I tried to do something different, but eventually I came back to Kabuki because I can't really keep away from theater completely for that long a time.
May I ask you, as a child, did you have any favorite plays?
Oh my, well, one of the first really big shows I was in for community theater was Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which is really an American classic. I played the little girl. It's a great part. She screams and hollers and jumps up and down. And I suppose that was my favorite play for a while. I started reading a lot. I liked Arthur Miller, I guess, and Lillian Hellman when I was young. I didn't get interested in Shakespeare until I was quite a bit older because, of course, I didn't understand it. Those were probably because I wasn't interested in, children's plays because my mother was professional and she gave me really good stuff to read. So I started reading, Maxwell Anderson and all these wonderful playwrights from the 30s and stuff like that. So I was a real highbrow kid.
I'm saying one thing else I'd like to ask you about this. Since you were so interested in drama, I'm wondering if you had any interest in the movies or not.
Oh, yes. Old movies. 1930s and 40s. Of course, my mother knew all the actors, and I was very much taken with Betty Davis, who is still my favorite actor on the face of the earth, my favorite English-speaking actor, I should say. She looked very much like my grandmother, about whom I was crazy, and I just thought she was great. And in Boston, we have these all-night TV stations with all the old movies. And my mother used to say, my mother educated me in all the old movies, Carol Lombard and all the old Depression movies. So I have a very good background in classical movies, if there is such a thing. I was very interested in film also,
Since you are still in Tokyo, probably we shouldn't let you leave Tokyo without sharing your theatrical activities in Tokyo. And would you mind telling us a bit about TIP?
TIP, yes. The Tokyo International Players. I hadn't really done too much stage work for several years because I'd been in Japan involved with my studies. And about 3 years ago, I saw an ad in one of the English language papers. They were doing a Shakespeare production, many different productions, a compendium of the history plays, and I went down and tried out and got a part. They are the oldest English-speaking theater group in Tokyo. They started in the 1890s. They used to put on their shows at the old Imperial Hotel Ballroom. Now they do it at the American Club. They do 3 or 4 major productions a year and several readings. They do very good things, and I've done many things with them. And I have several interesting stories if you'd like to hear any of them. If there's no time, we can skip over them.
No, we still have some time, and we're all ears.
There's one interesting story which shows you a little bit about the difference between the Japanese and the Western attitude toward theater. I was the stage manager last year for a production of Neil Simon's I Ought to Be in Pictures, in which Walter Carroll played the lead, and he was very good. And the set was supposed to be a bachelor bungalow in Los Angeles, and the guy who lived there was a real slob. He lived alone. He never cleaned up. So the property people took great difficulty and great hardship in getting real American rubbish, cornflake boxes and beer cans, and they had to decorate the set with all this horrible rubbish that the guy never cleaned up. And the prop man was great. And before the show, the day before the show, after dress rehearsal, he spread the rubbish all over the stage in a very artistic way, and we left very late at night, and we came in the next day, and the Japanese janitors at the American Club had cleaned up all the rubbish. They thought it was junk because they absolutely couldn't imagine how this real rubbish could be part of a stage set. Unlike the kabuki, where they never use anything realistic, anything really filthy. And we were just beside ourselves. Fortunately, they hadn't thrown it away. We had to go down to the garbage rooms.
It was still there.
It was still there, and fork through all the horrible old dirty rubbish because it was real American rubbish. We couldn't use Japanese cornflakes boxes on the stage. It had to be American. That's probably the strangest experience I've had.
Yes, that's really funny. But I'm sorry to say, Faith, but that's all the time we have today. And I'm sure you are also interested in Japanese kabuki plays. Would you mind coming over again to talk to us and share some of your views
I would
on
love
kabuki?
to.
All right. Everyone, this concludes today's guest hour. Be sure to join us again. Till then, so long.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
担当は東後勝明先生。聞き手はベス・ヒギンズさん。ゲストはフェイス・バッハさんでした。英語会話を終わります。
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our English conversation program. It's a great pleasure for us to be back presenting the second half of our discussion with Miss Faith Bach.
Hello, everyone. This is Beth Higgins welcoming you to the guest hour again. Here with us is Faith Bach, talking to us particularly about Japanese classical theater kabuki. I'm sure you'll enjoy listening to her. It's another Saturday, and we're very happy to be continuing our conversation with Miss Bach, but just for the benefit of those of you who couldn't join us last time, let me sum up what we talked about. Miss Faith Bach, whose voice I'm sure you're all familiar with from this program, was born and brought up in Boston. She's a freelance actor, a kabuki commentator, and will soon be a graduate student at Oxford. She received her bachelor's degree from Sophia University here in Tokyo and her master's degree from the University of Minnesota. She's very interested in the theater and performed in her first play at the age of 11. Faith, it's very nice to have you with us again.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. Hello, everybody.
I think towards the end of last session, we got a little bit into a discussion of kabuki and so on, and your interest in the theater. And I'd like to begin today by asking you, what is it about kabuki that so charms you?
Everything.
I knew you would say that.
It's wonderful. It's really great theater. It's pure, straightforward theater. It's people's theater. There's audience participation to an extent that I don't feel we have in the West, and it's an actor's theater. It's built around the actor, and as an actor, I enjoy that. I was originally interested in kabuki because as a student of Shakespeare in America, I was interested that a theater could be alive today in very much the same way as it used to be done. Just like the old days, and that was the intellectual reason I got interested in it. I see now that it's still like that because it was so great back then that there's no reason it had to change, and I got really caught up in it. It's just very, very different from what we're used to in the West, but to me it's a very kind of pure, straightforward kind of theater.
Mm-hmm. And when did you say that you became interested in kabuki for the first time?
Well, I first got interested in it when I first came on the Year in Japan program, but I didn't go very much in those days because the tickets were so expensive. And this time when I came back, I was fortunate at Ochanomizu Joshi Daigaku to take a class with Hattori Yukio sensei, who's a very great kabuki scholar. He's now at Chiba University, very enthusiastic, and he got me interested in it academically, and I began to really study it about 3 years ago. Then the kabuki theater started making English earphone guides, and I was hired to do, as one of the original group, to do the English commentaries, and they got very popular. And then a year ago we started the International Friends of Kabuki. We now have about 300 members of Japanese and non-Japanese, which is a fan club for English-speaking kabuki fans who can't get the information in Japanese. And so the foreign community has been getting very interested in kabuki lately, and I've been sort of part of that movement.
Well, what do you think are some of the major reasons for this growing popularity of kabuki among Western people or people from other countries in general, despite obvious language barriers?
Well, I just don't think the language is that much of a barrier, really. I think language is less important in kabuki than in, say, Shakespeare, where the text is very important. Kabuki language is very beautiful if you happen to understand Japanese, but if you don't, kabuki is a particularly broadly visual theater. Mm-hmm. It's a series of pictures, and it's very easy to understand because language is only part of it. There is the music, and there is the movement, and the pantomime, which is easy to understand. I also think Westerners like it because it has, as I say, a sense of audience participation. They have to use their imagination and not their intellects. They have to work to understand it. I think they're charmed by such things as people in dog suits instead of real dogs. In the West, we would use a real dog. This is one of the things about what we call presentational theater as opposed to representational theater in the West. Representational theater pretends to be reality. We in the theater speak of the audience as the fourth wall. The stage has 3 walls, and the audience is the fourth wall. They're sort of peeking into the room. But in Kabuki, the actors march out on the Hanamichi, and they stand right in the middle of the audience, and they say, "We are actors, and this is theater." And I think the Westerner finds that charming and refreshing, because the representational theater in the West, the realistic theater, gives you a very sort of passive feeling of spectatorship. It's like going to the movies. You really have to make an imaginative leap to believe what's going on in Kabuki. You have to make an effort to get into the Kabuki world. And it also is very much a world. They talk about the Kabuki world. For example, you have in December when they play Chushingura on stage, there's also a festival where they march through the streets dressed as the original samurai. The actor who plays Oiwa in Yotsuya Kaidan makes a pilgrimage to her grave in Yotsuya. It's very much a part of life, just as it was in Edo and in the Tokugawa period. And I think that the Westerner finds that very different. It's a very sort of exciting, kind of all-encompassing thing, and the language barrier really isn't a difficulty, I think. I don't think there's anything, because you're very, very close to what's going on. The senses are very close. It's not an intellectual exercise so much. So they don't have the problem as probably the Japanese have when they go to Shakespeare, because Shakespeare, which was originally, as we understand it, a lot more like Kabuki is today, Shakespeare has become much more intellectualized. It's become much more a thing that is words, that is text. And if you don't understand Shakespearean English, you're lost. But Kabuki is a much broader experience. And I think it's easier for the foreigners to enjoy Kabuki than it is for a foreigner to England to enjoy Shakespeare. It's very easy to understand. It's very obvious, and very lively and loud. And even if you don't know what's going on, it's such a fantastic spectacle because it's arranged that way. It's arranged to be a very beautiful visual spectacle, and many different senses are put into use, not just the intellect. I just hope that Kabuki will be expanded a lot more in that direction, and I think many of the actors hope so too. When the traditional Japanese Kabuki audience starts to die off, many of the actors would like to spread Kabuki so that they can get a bigger audience to keep it going.
Sounds like we have to get tickets tomorrow and go and see it.
Tickets.
I think so.
Well, just as there are several types of plays, like comedies or tragedies and Western drama, and there are some categories under which Kabuki plays fall, such as, say, sewamono or ninja-mono or shosagoto or whatever you call them. What are some of your favorite types of plays or dances?
I personally like sewamono. That might be because I read Japanese and I understand the text. I love Mokuami, mainly because Mokuami has a sense of humor. He's very, very funny and very, very clever. And I enjoy sewamono because they're sort of they're recognizable. They're slightly realistic, but they still have these very pure kabuki elements, and they're very interesting. I also like Chikamatsu's plays, which are very classical, but like all great geniuses like Shakespeare, his plays are very modern because they're so very, very pure. Simplicity is the thing with him, and simplicity becomes very modern. Plays like Domomata and Shunkan are very, very beautiful plays, sort of bare bones plays. I like those as well. I'm not a big dance fan, probably because I don't know that much about dance. That's something that you really have to study the different furi, so you really know what's going on. I'm a little ignorant about shosagoto.
Do you do some dancing yourself?
No, I'm a klutz. As we say in English, a klutz. I can't chew gum and walk at the same time.
I must say one thing that surprised me when I first attended Kabuki was hearing people in the audience say something. Actually, I was rather shocked, but then someone explained to me this is done to encourage the actors on the stage. Anyway, I think there's no such custom in Western theater. Could you explain a little more about the idea behind this?
Well, to me, it's a wonderful symbol of the audience participation I was talking about before, that you have to really sort of be there with it in order for it to mean anything to you. In the old days, I understand, the fans would come in groups, like rugby fans now in England, and they would all dress up in the same costumes, you know, and they'd wear the crest of the actor they had come to support on their headbands, and they'd make a great deal of noise, and they'd compete with each other, and just like the rugby fans. Nowadays, people are much quieter. Many Westerners are surprised that they don't applaud. But I think that one of the things about this kakegoi is that there are a lot of climaxes in kabuki. There are moments. The play will run for 20 minutes with nothing really happening except they're just building the play until the moment where Masaoka is left alone and can give vent to her grief because her son has just been killed. And it's one moment, and Utaimon is on his knees on the Hanamichi, and he tries to get up, and he falls, and they all shout, "Mattemashita!" That is one climax, and then 5 minutes later there'll be another climax. And they want to show the actors that they appreciate it. It's an art, as you may know. You can't just holler. I mean, these guys really study, and it comes in at the perfect time, and the actors love it, and the audience loves it, and it makes everybody one big happy family. I don't think you can do that in the West, except possibly when Hamlet says, to be or not to be. You might shout. In Shakespeare's plays, there are much more of a series of climaxes than there are in modern Western plays. And because there is this series, there are so many climaxes, you can't just wait till the end to applaud, because you get very excited during the play, and you say, "Oh, now is the moment when he..." And they all know the story, which doesn't take away from it, because you don't have the intellectual structure as you do in the West. It's an actors' theater, and the stories are made so the actors will have a series of nice moments, and the kakegoi is to show the appreciation. I think it's a wonderful custom. I love it.
Okay, Faith, I'm afraid the time is quite limited, and as you were saying earlier that you were also interested in classical Japanese movies, and of course Americans as well. And can you tell us some of the names of the American or Japanese movies, classical movies, that you most enjoy?
Well, when I say classical, I mean like Kurosawa Akira's movies I like very much. I think one of the first Japanese movies I saw was Shichini no Samurai, which I really liked. I just love his movies. I think they're wonderful. I don't really know what else to say about it.
How do Japanese classical movies compare with those of Western?
Well, it's hard to say. Well, I love the camera work in Japanese movies. I think some of Kurosawa's camera work and Ozu's camera work is really inspired. I think some of those movies, those Japanese movies like Kurosawa and Ozu, are very similar to Western classical movies because they are director's movies. He works with a sort of repertory group, and he makes a coherent artistic statement rather than having the star system where you go to see like a Barbra Streisand movie. I think a director-oriented movie is a lot more interesting.
See.
Well, this may be a rather big question to ask you, but I'd like to ask you anyway. What is kabuki to you?
Kabuki is theater, and theater is people coming together in the wilderness and celebrating life.
Well, Faith, thanks very much indeed for being with us, and I'm sorry that's all the time we have today. And before we say goodbye, let us wish you a very, very pleasant journey home and to England.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed Japan.
We hope you have a pleasant stay in England.
Everyone, this concludes today's guest hour. So long.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
担当は東後勝明先生。聞き手はベス・ヒギンズさん。ゲストはフェイス・バッハさんでした。